Welcome to Cengage Learning's Engaging Today's Classroom podcast series. This series will explore how today's fast-paced environment, everything from the volatile economic climate to healthcare reform to leadership changes to new trends in technology, affects both what is taught and how it is taught in the classroom. We will speak with some of the country's top authors and instructors, getting their insights on everything from how students' attitudes toward particular courses have changed, to what resources they use in the classroom to keep students engaged, to their own thoughts on current events. Our first few podcasts in this series will focus on the economics classroom. We will begin with Greg Mankiw, the esteemed professor of economics at Harvard University. He's the author of the well-known Principles of Economics, now in its 5th edition, and can be found commenting on the industry at gregmankiw.blogspot.com. Greg will be interviewed by Bill Hendy, Vice President of Marketing for Business and Computers at Cengage Learning. The Engaging Today's Classroom podcast series is available for download on cengagebrain.com.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
Good, thank you.
We have, I'm sure you probably have seen an increased interest on the part of your students going into the economics class in the course as a result of recent events in the economy. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Oh, sure. At Harvard, now, economics is a very popular major. In fact, the most popular major on campus. The introductory courses is always one of the biggest courses on campus. So economics is always popular. But recent events have certainly increased the popularity. People are very aware that the economy affects their lives. They're seeing seniors graduating into a tough labor market. So I think the freshmen coming in to take my introductory course understand what they're learning here really matters for their lives very fundamentally.
Good. With the crisis that kind of came upon us a couple of years ago, how have you managed to keep your course more interesting in terms of keeping students engaged as they learn about the principles?
We try to bring a lot of current events into the course. So whether it's healthcare and health policy that's being debated right now, or the economic crisis, we try to bring all those things in to try to motivate students and make them realize how important these topics are. On the other hand, the basics of economics, the fundamentals, supply and demand, market efficiency, market failure, the fundamentals of economics had not changed. So the key is to, on the one hand, use the current events to stoke student interest. On the other hand, to then pivot and explain to students, look, there's some basic economic principles you need to learn first before you get to these more complicated events that we're experiencing right now.
That's good. Are there any particular issues or things that the government has done, for example, to kind of stimulate the economy that you think is really important to try to include now that you wouldn't have included maybe a couple of years ago?
Well, for example, certainly discussion of fiscal policy. We've always discussed fiscal policy and fiscal policy multipliers. A discussion of that, the debate over fiscal policy multipliers is even more important now than it has been traditionally. And then there's certain topics like financial institutions that need to get more attention. I think of the financial institutions like the banks and investment banks as sort of being background players. They're sort of like the stagehands behind a play. You know, as long as the play is going on, nobody pays attention to the stagehands, but if all of a sudden they go on strike, people start noticing that the stagehands had an important role. Well, similarly, when the financial institutions have stopped functioning, when a lot of them found themselves near the point of bankruptcy, people are paying much more attention to financial institutions. And I think we'll, in the future, pay more attention in teaching to the role of financial institutions in the economy.
You've written the best-selling Principles of Economics text. And one of the things that I hear a lot when I talk to instructors is it's so readable. I mean, you present it in a way that students understand it. That probably combined with how you continue to keep students engaged by bringing in current events is probably a critical part of their outcomes for that class. Can you comment a little bit about maybe how you do that specifically in terms of bringing in current events?
Well, one of the things we do in my principles book is have lots of in the news boxes, which turn over every edition. So a few of them stay in, but most of them are new in every edition. And the purpose of those in the news boxes is to show students that the basic principles we're teaching in the main part of the text is applicable to the everyday's news.
Cool.
So my goal is when they leave the course, they open up the newspaper, they're going to see economics everywhere. So just like they saw that, particularly in the news boxes in the text, when they'll open up the newspaper and say, that could have been in the news box. And they'll understand how these basic economic principles that we're learning throughout the year apply to everyday's newspaper.
That's great. You probably have also understood that we have a lot more interest in online resources in the course. Do you find that students are benefiting from having more online materials accessible to them for the economics course?
Well, I'm benefiting from having more online resources available because I read a lot of things on the web. I read lots more newspapers than I did before because I can get the world's newspapers at my fingertips, sitting in bed with my laptop.
Yep.
So the web is a wonderful resource pedagogically, no matter what the age of the reader is. One of the things I do is I maintain this blog that posts links to a variety of articles around the web that I find interesting, and I think some students who take my course follow my blog, and they follow some of the links to articles that are interesting. And we also maintain a blog map that sort of links the entries in the blog to the textbook chapters. So if somebody wants to use the blog, the teaching resource, the blog map provides a vehicle for them to do that.
That's great. So that is a really effective way to keep your content in your printed form current as well.
That's right. Economics is constantly changing, and we can put out a new edition every few years, but the content of the economy is changing day by day. That's one of the purposes of the blog, is to make teaching as current as the news.
That's great. Do you think in terms of, you have children, right?
I have 3 kids.
And I'm sure they're learning differently. They're not only reading content, but they're probably visual learners, audio learners. I mean, how do you see students in the future learning, and how do you try to take that into account when you do write your text or expectations of your publisher, for example?
Well, try to present material in different ways. Like, it's the same argument in the text is usually presented verbally and graphically. Some students will find the graphs intuitive, others won't, and we'll just find the verbal explanations adequate. So I try to appreciate that there's a whole variety of learning styles. Some people find economics easy, some people find it very hard, and I try to take that into account when I'm preparing the text.
That's great. Good. You know, you've spent a great deal of time in working with your colleagues to come up with the best supplements package for your textbook. Can you comment on how you yourself might use those in the classroom?
Oh, yeah, there's a terrific supplements package. Well, one of those I use is the PowerPoints that Ron Kronovich has put together. Ron is a good friend of mine and put together really a terrific set of PowerPoints. I teach a very large lecture class at Harvard, about 700 students, so I can't use a blackboard with 700 students. But the PowerPoints that Ron has put together have been really terrific. What I do is I take them in from the publisher's website, and then I edit them for my own personal lectures. But he provides a great starting point for me as I'm preparing each lecture.
Well, that's great. Good. I've always been curious in this business about how authors, start to write their texts and start to revise their texts. Can you comment a little bit about your writing process, Greg?
Yeah, I write first thing in the morning. I try to do it first thing when I'm fresh. I have my cup of coffee and I go up and I write for the first 2 hours every day. I really enjoy writing, and I'm a very self-conscious writer, and I love reading Strunk and White. I love reading Williamson's on Writing Well. Stephen King has a great book about the writing process. So I really enjoy the process of writing, and I really enjoy the process of revising. So the thing about textbooks is you can always revise them. There's always another edition coming, so you can always make them better. And so every few years when a new edition comes out, I hire a bunch of Harvard students. We go through the book carefully, line by line, and see, can I make this sentence clearer? And I think each edition does get better than the previous one.
That's great. I think just maybe in closing, if you'd like to comment on how you're looking at moving forward with your next edition, some of the things you might be thinking about. I'm very excited about your mapping your blog to the textbook, and it's a nice way to keep your current edition contemporary too.
Well, I start revising the new edition as soon as the old edition is put to bed.
Okay.
So the second I'm done with one edition, I start collecting articles and ideas for the next edition. So already on my hard disk, by the time the new edition's hitting people's desks, there are already a bunch of articles that I've collected that I think might be relevant for 2-3 years from now. So I'm already collecting them. Some of them you'll see in the blog, some not. But each edition has a bunch of new, in the news boxes, a bunch of new case studies to show that the timeless principles of economics applies today.
Great. So when you do revise your book, are you still being pretty true to your 10 principles?
Yeah, the book starts, chapter 1, with 10 principles of economics that I think of as the starting point for thinking about how the economy works. And those 10 principles are timeless, and they're still true, and they haven't changed since the first edition, and I don't imagine them changing. They've got a sort of life of their own. Yoram Bauman has this great YouTube video sort of making fun of my 10 principles. There's a great rap song that explains the 10 principles in rap that I play for my students. In fact, just did a couple weeks ago. So they're really a great way to start the course in terms of introducing students to economics, and a great way to tie everything in the course back to some big ideas.
Great. Fantastic. Well, it's a real pleasure talking to you about this, and thank you for your time today.
Good talking to you.
Great.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. The conversation will continue next month when we turn to economics experts Alan Blinder and Bob Hall for their insight on how today's economic situation has changed their classroom and teaching. Again, the Engaging Today's Classroom podcast series is available for download on CengageBrain.com.